Pete. So she's going to start, and to turn that on, you just click that up.
Yes.
Yep. She's going to start by reading a story, and then we'll get to the stories themselves.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's Friday. You may have this day off, so you may want to be hanging out at home. So I appreciate that you came out to see me today. So this collection just came out last week, so it's pretty fresh. I'm going to read one story which started off as a poem in my first book called Scar on Scar Off, and then I turned it into fiction. So I'll read that, and then we can get into this conversation. All right. When trying to return home. Now that Andra has moved to South Florida, she has become Andra, Black, and something else. In the northern city where she grew up, they called her Hey You. In the Midwest, where she lived with her father after her parents divorced, she was Cal's baby. In Puerto Rico, where she watched her mommy pass in Ponce, Andra was La Negrita, la hija de Nadia. This month, Andra has come to South Florida for a position at the marketing firm, and her coworkers ask her about the something else, or properly, where she is from. When she says the northern city, they say, no, I mean, really. So she tells them she's Black. Specifically, her daddy is Black American, her mommy Caguas born, mixed with several something else's. Her coworkers get dull-eyed hearing this. They are satisfied. She's bored too. This is a new thing, though, to have a boring conversation about race where nobody cares about her answers. In this Florida city, she is like everyone, bubbling with somebody else's language, body full with misted ancestors, yearning for old ghosts. In her second month in the city, Andra has gotten along fine. The September wind is variously mild. She's afraid of the new rain, how it slams and sticks. Her coworkers tell her Florida weather is like this. The rains look hurricane strong, but they'll abate soon enough. She learns how to drive better in storms. She is no longer scared. The rains let up soon enough. Andra has gotten along just fine. She finds friends from all over the city who speak slanty Spanish like her mommy did before she died. She's found friends from many countries, and they take her shopping at flea markets, bring her mangoes plucked from backyard glens. They eat ropa vieja at circle tables and laugh and laugh. Andra can finally relax. Her shoulders stay sweet. She considers these the kindest months of her life. Andra has gotten along fine, but she wonders about the something else her friends ask about. If it's something she's missing. One morning in her third month in the Florida city, Andra stops at the panaderia on Southwest 137th. In the parking lot, a trigueña with high-piled hair looks at her twice. She resembles Andra's dead mother, mostly in the face. The woman has plate-round eyes, a short nose, ruddy cheeks. The heavy rains have made her hair shine and frizz. A red shirt hangs loosely off of her small frame. Her cart is full of pan wrapped in paper sleeves with cans of Goya lentejas, like Andra's mommy used to buy. The woman sees Andra and her eyes glitter. The trigueña must have felt the crackle of recognition, too. She asks where Andra is from. Beside Andra's skin speaks Spanish. Discúlpame, mi amor, she says politely, stopping her cart. Eres Latina. Andra's chest twists tight and her breasts get loud. The woman goes on about how her Chevy broke down last week after some asshole rear-ended it. Now Trigueña has to ride the damn bus, an hour longer than her regular commute. The woman repeats, mi amor, to catch Andra's attention, and this little bit of softness chokes Andra's insides. Mi amor, on the island, is glibly affectionate, doesn't connote anything too close. When Mommy called Andra mi amor, Andra would imagine a heart drawn around cursive scrawl like a valentine. A little heart would pop off her mother's tongue, sail to Andra. In her mommy's mouth, mi amor was a promise, a forever bond. This one was just saying hello. The trigueña goes on in English. I'm sorry, you can't understand me. You are Haitian? Andra is not Haitian. She understands everything the woman is saying, but she's too afraid to speak Spanish now. She could tell the woman that she was not born by ocean rims or white scuffed waves, nor beside people who speak this blue city's itchy talk. She wonders what it would be like to tell this woman how lovely it is to be in a crowd where nobody remembers her skin, that she misses her mommy every day and draws pictures of her mother's face in her sketchbook to make her appear, that when Andra saw her mommy days from death on that folding bed in Ponce, Mommy was out of breath. That night, Mommy said in labored Spanish, I don't know how to tell you How sad it will be to stop seeing your face. How Andra said nothing then, too, because she couldn't express heartbreak in any language. This woman doesn't care about these things. Andra rolls through the customary story about her family in Spanglish, tries to tell her about the bus line. The woman says brightly, "A lo menos eres Latina." Andra says awkwardly, "At least." The woman says in English, "You should speak Spanish to me. The kids your age stuff Spanish in their bellies but leave it there. They eat it but shit it out." Andra wants to respond to this, but she freezes. She points limply to the street behind her, says clumsily in English the number of the bus that goes downtown. "Comes in a few hours," Andra reminds her. The woman looks disappointed. Andra knows why the woman is frowning. The woman laughs in no language. Andra could tell her the history of her family gods. Say that her family gods are rainforest hot, cropland warm, dark and blazing with every colored skin. Their mouths sound like all kinds of countries. She could tell her those gods live wild and holy in her, in white and blue cities where her skin is remembered or forgotten, in cities where she was always one thing, or from anywhere. But that would be boring. The Trigueña merely wanted some help, perhaps the quick entertainment of wondering this negra was from her country, which was Costa Rica, apparently, not Puerto Rico. The Florida sun slams through a snatch of cloud and catches the woman's face. The Trigueña looks nothing like her mother. Andra's mommy was tall. This woman is tiny. Andra's mommy avoided strangers. The woman starts toward the bus stop. Andra doesn't want her to go. Andra wants her to push the woman's bread cart and ride the bus with her downtown and take her groceries up to her apartment by the shuffling shore. Andra could clean her floors while the woman takes a nap. Andra would speak shit Spanish, cook the woman shit arroz con gandules. They'd eat together, then sit side by side on a love seat at sunset. They'd try to find a good channel on television. They'd guess Jeopardy answers before the evening dramas came on. Andra opens her mouth to say something, but the not mother is gone. Andra doesn't have the language to tell her another thing. In this moment, when that woman came up thinking Andra belonged to her, they were together, at least. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. You can clap, that's okay. Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to start just to ask you to tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
And how you became a writer.
Yeah. I've been writing since I was a little kid. I think I grew up I just kind of was a little bit isolated, so I was just like, how do I escape into different worlds? I was just constantly reading. I was just reading all the time. I was like, how do these people do this? I want to do this too. So I was just writing since I was like as young as I remember. I was writing these little books, and my mom had them scattered over the house. She's like, what is this? I used to like staple them together and like try to like give them to my family so they would read my little books. So I think I've been doing this for a very long time. But I thought I wanted to become a doctor because my dad was a doctor, and I think that he was trying to push me in that direction. So when I went to undergrad, I was in pre-med, but I just knew I loved writing, and I ended up getting my majoring in English writing. And then I had this big conversation with my dad. I was like, Dad, I want to be a writer. I just want to do this. I have to do this. I can't be a doctor. And he was like, okay. So then I ended up kind of deciding to get an MFA. So then I got an MFA, and then I got a PhD in creative writing, and I kept writing along the way, and I started putting these kind of larger projects together. So, yeah.
Wow. Is your dad a doctor?
My dad's a doctor, yeah.
Okay. Was that a hard conversation?
It was a very hard conversation. It was an extremely hard conversation.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. But he's fine with it now.
Go ahead, what?
He's fine with it now.
Yeah.
He's happy with it now.
There's a lot of doctors, though, that are writers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any that you particularly like, or do you read them, or?
Yes. I read the book Concussion, and I'm now forgetting the name of the doctor, but it was a wonderful book, and I really like that book. But who else? I have to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, yeah,
with that.
no.
Yeah, so, well, the next question I wanted to ask was, you've written a lot of poetry, and this is a collection of short stories. Have you always written in both genres? And how did you make that shift?
Yeah.
And how are the challenges different with poetry versus, short stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was an undergrad, I was a poetry TA for a while, and I took a poetry class with Lynn Emanuel, and I was just blown away by how good it was. And when I was in high school, I was writing poetry, but I think I read poetry and fiction. I read them both kind of equally. So I felt very akin to both of those genres. My MFA, I went there for fiction, and my PhD, I went there for fiction too, but I met this wonderful writer named Monica Hand who ended up passing away. And she was like, I was like, I'm a fiction writer, because when you're in MFA, you go into a genre, and you kind of feel very fixed within that genre, but I loved poetry so much, so I kept writing poetry. And she was like, if you write poetry, you're a poet. You have to consider yourself a poet. You do both. So I was just like, oh, thank you. So then I ended up pursuing poetry and fiction when I was in my PhD. So I think I've always done both. I think I really like going in and out and kind of creating a maximum impact and then kind of pulling away. I'm working on a novel now, but I really like that in the short form. So I feel I'm really drawn to short stories and poetry because of that. But poetry, I think you're really thinking about each line. You're thinking about the language of each line and the rhythm of each line. And I think in short stories, you're also thinking about that, but you also have a little bit more, I don't know, I think you can move around a little bit more, and there's maybe a little bit more freedom to kind of move your characters around, and it's a little bit more expansive in poetry. Every single line really matters, so you really care about every single line. So I think that maybe those are the kind of differences between them for me.
Yeah, so the form's a little more constraining with poetry.
Maybe
You think?
not for everybody. I think for
Right.
me, because I care so much about each line, but I feel my emotional seat, I feel the most emotionally close to poetry, so I feel like my poetry is like very close to my heart. In fiction, I put on like my logic brain a little bit more because I'm trying to think about the characters and the plot and how to move everything around a little bit more. So I think maybe those are two different brains that I put on when I'm writing them.
So when you write a collection of stories like this, are you trying to write in a particular style? Do you have a storytelling style, do you think? Or do the stories just come to you? How do you go about that, writing a story?
Yeah, I honestly feel like a medium sometimes, where I feel like I just like channel these voices and channel these people, and then I just get in there, and then suddenly like I become those people. I used to be in an acting minor, and like they talked so much about inhabiting your character and method acting and really becoming that character. And when I do fiction, I really feel like I feel like I'm in a trance when I'm writing most of the time. But then when I go back and edit, then I'm like, ooh, what happened there? Oh no.
Yeah.
I think I need to go back and like play around with this a little bit more because I don't know what I was doing. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's cool. So when you think about your work, both your poetry and your short stories, what writers or ideas or themes do you find yourself in conversation with?
In conversation. I think that's a really interesting question because I know my inspirations. My inspirations are Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, really my king and queen. I come back to them all the time, just to kind of, and I love Haruki Murakami too, and Zora Neale Hurston. So, and Mayra Santos Febres is a Puerto Rican writer. So I come back to them a lot. I don't think, I don't know if I'm in conversation with them. I think that'd be a big comment to make, but I really admire them. So I would say that I look up to them a lot when I look.
Okay, this is kind of a historian's question. Sorry, audience, but I get to ask. Because I teach Baldwin. I'm sure my colleague Juan Galvan teaches James Baldwin. I don't teach enough Toni Morrison, honestly. So if you had a recommendation for because I like mixing genres or disciplines in the class. So if you're thinking about a history class, what should students read of Baldwin, or what should students read of a Toni Morrison, do you think? Do you have any suggestions along those lines? And just or for them in their own lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, I would read that. It's a collection of essays. I think you should read that just to get kind of also the historical basis, because James Baldwin was You know, he was right at the forefront of the civil rights movement. He was, you know, he was close to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, so he was at the forefront of it. So I think The Fire Next Time is really a great one. Giovanni's Room is my favorite James Baldwin novel, so I would definitely go to that one. What else? Another Country is really good. I don't know if it's always everyone's favorite, but I actually thought it was really well fleshed out, and it kind of gives you this kind of percolating New York. Toni Morrison, Beloved is my favorite book by her, hands down, but I really love Song of Solomon. It's probably my second favorite, and Tar Baby was the first book of hers I ever read. So I would say Tar Baby, Song of Solomon. I'm just going to keep all of them.
In other words, you can't go wrong, John, if you
just can't go
assign
wrong.
those. Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's kind of an unfair question, but no, I mean it's something I think about a lot because we try to bring different voices into the classroom, and you want to bring something in that is going to be effective.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's going to resonate with the students, and it's always nice when they come into the classroom and say, "Oh, I really like this book." You know,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I teach Beloved every semester.
Oh, do you?
I try to teach it in one. I teach 3 classes per semester, and each class I try to wedge it into each class that I teach. So I'm just like, even if it's like literature and experience, this is a survey class. I'm like, you're reading it. And
Right.
Just gonna figure out a way
Right.
that you need to read it.
Have you noticed? Have the reactions to Beloved changed over time that you've seen, or are they pretty consistent?
That's a really good question. Since I wasn't around when it was published, I think when it first came out, I mean, I think that, you know, I think critics say, I'm not really certain about like complete critical reception. I know it helped her win the Nobel Prize,
Right.
so obviously it got really great reception. And I think that, you know, I think from the biggest critics, I think everybody was saying it was genius. But I think that, I think it's in the canon now. I think it's like now considered one of the greatest works of literature.
But do you notice a difference with your students from year to year?
Oh, yeah. I think with the upper level students, they tend to really respond well to it. And I think that with the kind of survey classes, you know what, it depends on the student. I think that it's kind of, every class has a personality, and it's like isostasis too, like when you teach, like every class has a personality. You get to feel kind of how everybody responds to things. But I've been really blessed to have a lot of really great students. So a lot of my students have really been able to delve deep into the book and figure out and tease out its themes in ways that I've been surprised. You know, so I've been really lucky with that.
And I've noticed from year to year how students react to a particular book.
Some students are just like, oh no, this is really graphic. Or like, oh, I can't believe I'm reading this.
Right.
But then other students, they understand why they're reading it.
Yeah, it does vary. Well, so how did you come to write this short story collection?
Yeah, so anyone here is an undergrad. The first story I wrote when I was an undergrad. So that means that you might be working on a book yourself and you don't even know you're working on it. The first story I ever wrote was in my last year, in my senior seminar when I was at Pitt, which was my undergraduate. I didn't know I had a short story collection, but I used that story to get me my MFA, and then I used it again to get my PhD, so the same story. I just kept using that same story. I was like, let's see. So, it wasn't until I was like in my PhD where I realized that I had all these short stories. I kept writing them for MFAs, I kept writing them on my own, I kept writing them for solicitations and all these reasons, and I was just like, I'm pretty I have enough stories that this could be a collection. I just need to write a few more. And then I was like, and then it was originally called Where I'm Bound, because there's a story called I Don't Know Where I'm Bound, which I got a solicitation for a Johnny Cash anthology. And they said, write about something that's related to Johnny Cash. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do like a black Johnny Cash. I'm gonna have like a badass black Mavis. I'm gonna have a badass black woman who just lives her own life, does whatever she wants to do. And she is just completely in her own power. And I'm gonna have her fall in love with her own June, which is a young woman she is a singer, and it's gonna take place in Nashville. I've been in Nashville before a lot. So I was like, that's what I'm doing. But then the title story was supposed to be called Where I'm Bound, because I thought every character is bound to something. Is bound to a person, they're bound to people, they're bound to a person, bound to a place. And then after I finished my first poetry book, Scar On Scar Off, I had a poem called When Trying to Return Home. And after I went back, I was just reading my book again, and I went back to that poem, and I was just like, you know what, that's not the real through line of this short story collection, it's home, because all these characters are leaving or coming home. And then I was just like, okay, and I was like, let me take that story and then turn it into fiction and see how this comes together. And then that clicked. And then I wrote the final story called Liberation Day in the collection. And then I was like, okay, I finished it, it's done, I'm gonna send this to my agent. Because before it was kind of unfinished. It was my dissertation for my PhD, but it felt unfinished. There was something not finished about it. So then I made those completions and then I sent it to her.
That's interesting that you brought Johnny Cash up, because that was actually my next question.
Yeah.
Which was, why a Johnny Cash story? I like Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
I mean, I like his music. So are you a Johnny Cash fan?
I am a Johnny Cash fan. I do like Johnny Cash. Yeah.
What is it about him that you particularly like?
I just like that. I mean, I like that he's just in his own power. He just does whatever that's what I liked about him. I think he's also very talented, but I also think that I like people that just do whatever the hell they want to do. He did it to the, he probably could have restrained himself a whole lot more, but I just found him interesting. And I think that after I got that solicitation because
Now, was that a crime story you wrote on Johnny Cash, or?
So it was a crime anthology, but then I was like, it wasn't really a crime. I thought the crime was running out. If you read this collection, I think the crime was like running out on your own show and not having to be able to pay, not like, if someone books you for something and you run out of it,
okay.
So I was like, well, it's not really a big crime. So there was a crime writer called Joe Clifford, and he asked me to write a story for his anthology, and it was based on Johnny Cash. And he was like, find a Johnny Cash song and then write a story to that. And I was like, okay, I don't want to do Folsom Prison Blues. I don't want to do the ones everyone's doing. I want to do like a song that people haven't heard before. And then I heard one he did a kind of smaller cut called I Don't Know Where I'm Bound. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to write to that one. And at that point, I'd been spending a lot of time in Nashville. So I was like kind of like in that culture a little bit. So I was just like, okay, I'll write about that.
I grew up in Kentucky, so I was introduced to Cash because I ran track and cross country at the University of Kentucky, and
wow.
We were having the program was kind of coming back from some problems, and anyway, some of the guys on the team wrote a song based on Folsom Prison Blues, and they called it "I'm Stuck on UK's Track Team," which is the same sort of thing. And I still remember the lyrics. I was actually thinking about it in preparation for today, but it's like I'm not singing that song. So.
That's awesome.
Anyway, no, it would be very bad. So, coming back to the collection, how has your experience as an Afro-Latina influenced the theme of this collection, do you think?
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I would go to this Barnes & Noble in the Waterworks Mall in Pittsburgh, and I would go there and look for books from people that reflected my own experiences. And I found Toni Morrison first, and that's how I fell in with Toni Morrison. I was like in middle school, and in the district that I was in, they were just teaching white male writers. I think they had it was Emily Dickinson and like Edith Wharton were the only women we got, and it was just all men, and then all white people. So I was like, where are my experience? Like I want my experiences represented in my books because I love reading so much. So I went to this Barnes Noble in Waterworks, and I kept looking for books from people that looked like me, and that's how I found Toni Morrison. But I always told myself that if I ever write a book, I'll write that book and have characters who are Black and Latina, who are Black Americans, who are at least part of experience that I've been through. So that way, if someone ever goes in the bookstore and looks for that, if someone from that background ever goes to a bookstore and looks for a book, they'll be able to find one. So that's why. That's how it's reflected in me.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So this is the nicest question. Okay? I have to give credit where credit's due right here.
I'm excited for that.
And right. So, and actually, as soon as she sent it to me, I thought, yeah, I want to know this myself. So one thing that's intriguing are some of the cultural markers in your work,
Right.
and with Goya, the Trigena, and how have you navigated those cultural markers, your use of Spanish in your work, for people that maybe aren't accustomed to them?
Yeah.
Somebody like myself, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I've dealt with it is that it's kind of, I mean, some of the books that I've read, and I've read books that take place in India and take place in Nigeria and take place all over the place. And what I've noticed is that they kind of just throw you in. They throw you in there, and then they kind of, you may not know the word, but you can look it up. You don't necessarily, you don't know it, then you can look it up. It's just, they kind of just bring you directly into that world. And that's what I wanted to do with this book too, where I don't expect everybody to know all the cultural references, and some of them are Puerto Rican references, some of them are just general Latino references, but I wanted you to kind of just be immersed in that world and then see the sort of language that's being used in the everyday.
Yeah.
So that's
Right.
how I approached it.
Yeah. So we're in an era where, I guess in a good way, books are as controversial as they've ever been. I know
Yeah.
League City, for example, there have been a lot of issues in the Houston Chronicle about the public library there. And,
Oh, I didn't even know that.
I think so, if I'm not mistaken. And so I've got a couple of questions on this. How do you feel about the state of American literature right now? And how do you feel about the state of Latino literature right now? And how does it fit into American letters, do you think?
I think we're part of the American story. I think we should be part of the canon. I think that, especially for educators, this is something that I care about a lot, that I want to have Black and Latino and Asian and Native and Indigenous and as many voices represented as physically possible, because we're part of the American story. We've been here for a very long time, so I think that kind of pushing those voices out or trying to rewrite history in a way that those voices weren't there or didn't have the experiences and the authentic experiences that they really had, I think that's wrong. I think it's a disservice to schools to be doing that.
Yeah. I do think that they've had some, with the public library in League City, I think they've created a new board to, I don't want to use the word censor because I don't know that that's right, but to evaluate maybe what books are, going to be accepted into the library. I may be wrong about that, so I want to be careful. But in a way, it seems like that's a good thing that we're arguing about books.
Yeah,
maybe
that's a really great point. That we're having these conversations. Yeah, whenever a book gets banned, it gets more popular. People are just like, oh, I'm not supposed to read this, so I'm going to get that immediately.
Right. So when I was reading the collection this week, one thing that struck me was religion.
Yeah.
Is central to the story.
I'm so happy you asked that, because I've done a couple of interviews and I know that's a big part, and nobody has asked that question. I was just like, isn't that going to come up eventually? Because there's a lot of that in there.
Well, it really jumped out at me.
Right.
And so, Estelle wants to be a nun.
Right.
And, Mavis, on the other hand, I think the word you use is that she thinks it's patriarchal bullshit.
Yeah,
is the
that's
phrase
true.
you use. But it's what struck me. So I just wanted to ask you personally, what are you doing there? What's the importance of religion and religious ideas and themes in your stories?
Yeah, I think I think religion is intricately woven. I think, at least in my experiences, because I grew up in a house that kind of elevated faith, but my family never really made me have to choose a faith. Like, they weren't like that. They were like, you can kind of do whatever you want. They were Christian, but they never made me they never said you have to be Christian or you have to do this or you have to do that. But I think it's kind of intricately woven into a lot of our lives. And I think that I've had my own kind of spiritual arc myself, where I've gone to a place of I feel like I'm a spiritual. I think I'm a relatively spiritual person. I believe in a higher power, but at the same time, I also can see the patriarchal bullshit that's within a lot of these systems. So I think that probably subconsciously kind of worked its way throughout a lot of my work.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you in reading the book, for me, it just was, the whole collection is just shot through with it.
Right.
You know, and so if you're interested, for many reasons, there are many reasons to read this collection, but that's, for me, was one that I found particularly intriguing. So.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier, I mentioned to you that 3 characters that I found particularly interesting in the collection were Estelle, who I said something about a moment ago, Cal, a young man who's desegregating, I think in 6th grade, a school in St. Louis, is that right? And right after Brown versus Board of Education, and then of course Mavis. So why don't you choose one of those 3 and tell the audience a little bit about one of those characters? I don't care which one.
Right. Shout out to my dad, because my dad inspired Cal. Because my dad actually was a young black boy who was one of the first black kids to desegregate a white school in St. Louis.
Wow.
And so that story kind of stuck with us ever since we were kids. And it would always be this source of kind of inspiration, and also telling us to, the schools that I grew up in were kind of racist. Like, they just were. I don't want to, whatever, they just were. But my dad would be like, you know what? He's like, you think that's racist? Well, when I was growing up, he's like, I desegregated this school, and they would go after school and they would beat me every day. Like
really?
Yeah, he said that the white kids would come and they'd chase me in the back and they'd beat me every day. But my older brother, since that started happening, my older brother used to come down and come to escort me back home. And then he would sometimes beat up the kids back because his older brother was bigger and larger. And I think that story always stuck with me because he's been telling that story since we were kids. And my grandmother would tell that story too. But she would always have a different kind of spin on it. She'd be like, oh, I'm so proud of him. He did all this. Look what he did. But my dad would be like, oh, that was actually a really rough experience for me. So I think that story stayed with me, and that influenced The Missing One. Because I almost wanted to write, because I think I still want to write my dad's story as a memoir with him or something like that, because I think his story is really remarkable. And he got himself out of a lot of poverty to become a doctor and everything like that, all by himself. So I think he's a really inspirational person. But that part of his life always inspired me, so I ended up writing about it in fiction.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good for him. That's
Yeah.
great. What about Mavis or Estelle, 2 great female characters in these stories? Could you say a little bit about either one of them?
Yeah. So Mavis was inspired by, was like a black female Johnny Cash, so that was who she was. And I wanted her to be kind of protective, but also very flawed, but also kind of just doing whatever the hell she wants all the time, and kind of like the id. And then Estelle was kind of like the ego, maybe not super ego, because I think she still has her own flaws herself. But I want
sisters.
They're sisters.
They're sisters in the story. Mavis and Estelle.
Yeah. So I think Mavis is more like the ego, and then Mavis is more like the id, and then Estelle is more like the ego. So kind of like those dual roles. But Estelle, okay, I guess I'll share the story, because why not? When I was younger, I actually had, very young, like in high school, I had a moment where I thought I wanted to become a nun. I actually thought that I might want to do that. Like, I was just like, you know what, it would be a very calm space, and I could just meditate all the time, and I could just be really chill, and I can just be around women, and it would be really cool. So I thought about that, and I almost went in that direction. So I think I thought about what would happen if I had actually gone in that direction and actually made that decision. And I think that inspired Estelle. And at that point, I had just finished my PhD. And I was in this weird space where it's a pandemic, and I was like, am I going to be able to get a job? I just got this PhD. I don't know what I'm going to do next in my life. Can I get a job? I don't know. So I had no idea what was going on in my life. And I just finished this big journey, and I think that story, Liberation Day, was kind of inspired by that place in my life where I didn't know what I was going to do next, and I didn't know where to go. So I was just like, this would be probably akin to putting all your effort into doing something as huge as becoming a nun, and then now you don't know what's next. So I ended up getting a job, so that all ended up working out. But I was in that weird space, that kind of in-between space, so I wrote about that. So that's where Estelle kind of came from. And the original story where Estelle came from was in Good Guys. That was the first story she was in. And my mom told this story about when she went to college, all these guys were hitting on this nun, and they didn't know she was a nun, and they found out she was a nun, and they were just mortified. So that was the story that my mom, so that's a story that my mom told me. So there's a lot of, basically most of the collection of stories my parents told me, and I just turned them into fiction.
Yeah, well, I mean, was it T.S. Eliot that said, you know, good writers borrow and great writers steal? And
Yeah.
They're always stealing stories.
I always tell my parents, I always give credit to my parents if I try, but I always tell them, I was like, hey, remember that story you told me? I'm going to write a story about it. And they're just like, they're like, okay.
Well, so our students are busy, you know.
Yeah, I'm so happy you
and
came out.
They have work, and they have their classes, and they're overly demanding professors and so forth. So, I mean, you are teaching at University of Houston Clear Lake, and you're writing, and I wanted to know, and I think our students would be interested to know how you balance those. How do you balance all that out, you know, with the teaching? Because teaching takes a lot out of me.
Yeah, it does.
You know, so how do you maintain the balance between your writing and your teaching and that sort of thing, and being so busy?
I need to be better at this, but I don't write a lot when I teach. It's like during the semester, it's awful. Because I think I'm so focused on teaching and so focused on lesson planning and my students and meetings and everything like that. I don't get as much writing done during the semester, but over the summer, I think I'm allowed to not teach over the summer, so I do all my writing over the summer. So I just spend all summer writing. And then once I'm in the semester over the year, I just focus on teaching. So that's why I get it done. I try to get it all done in like this one period.
So you're not Graham Greene writing 500 words a day and then going out and drinking the rest of the day.
And the awful thing is I tell my students, I was like, you have to have a habit, you have to write regularly. And they're like, are you doing that? I'm like, I try to, well, if I have to write something, like if someone gets solicited or something and they're just like, okay, well, you need to get this done by this date, then I'll write it. But during the semester, I'm just so focused on my students that it's kind of hard to find that energy sometimes to write.
Okay.
So that's the truth. I'm telling the truth here.
A little better, because I find that teaching takes a lot out of me as well.
It definitely does.
It's difficult because teaching is a creative process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every much is just it's a different type of creative process than writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, but it definitely is. Okay, so last question, then we're going to turn it over to the audience, and you guys can ask whatever you wish. One is, what's your next project? And then the second one is, what are you reading now that you're enjoying?
Yeah.
So we'll go with both of those.
That's great. My next project is a novel. And do you want to know about the novel? Or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Anything you want to tell us?
Okay, yeah. So when I was growing up, I always heard the song Billie Jean. And I was just like, I was like, what about Billie Jean's side? Like, we never hear her perspective.
Right.
Like, we hear Michael Jackson's version, but we never really hear her side of the story. So I wrote a novel about it, and it's with my editor right now, and we'll find out what they say. So I don't know. We're kind of sitting on pins and needles. So.
Fingers crossed. That's a great
fingers
idea.
Crossed.
The Wine Sargasso Sea, about the Mr. Rochester's wife in the attic, that novel. So taking the different perspective. What a great idea.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Hopefully my editor feels so.
Yeah, hopefully they like it as much as we do, right?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, y'all.
So, what are you reading now that you're enjoying? Or have read maybe recently that you've enjoyed a lot?
I just read The Dream Builders by Andrilla Mukherjee, and I actually just did a reading with her in Brazos, and it's a really extraordinary novel. So I definitely recommend it.
Is that the one about there's two groups of characters, one in Paris and another in Chicago? Am I
No,
remembering
this
that
is
correctly?
they're in India, kind of
Oh,
in
okay,
new
okay.
India, and it's very like Americanized India.
Okay.
And it's very good, and it's about this character who's a professor, who's 35-year-old professor. That's me. I'm
That's not
35-year-old
me.
professor. So we're just like, oh, I really connect with this. But she goes back home to India after her mother dies, and she starts reconnecting with her family and all the people that she used to know there. And it's told from multiple perspectives, and it's really, really good.
The
so.
Dream Builders.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really good.
I must be thinking of a different, I'm thinking of a different novel. So, yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad you did that at Brazos then.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just read with her in Brazos. Yeah,
Good for them.
yeah,
Right?
it was
Yeah.
a really great book.
Okay, so what questions do y'all have? That you go ahead, Yolanda.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you. And my question is, do you feel like the best stories come from personal life experiences?
Oh, that's such a good question.
I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I've had stories come from all over the place, just random things. But I think the stories that I'm most connected to, I'll find I'll put a strain of myself in there, where I'll have like, I think every character in this book has a little piece of me, where there's something about them that's a little bit close to me in some way, whether it's close to a family member or it's close to my experience. There's something about every character in this book, even the characters that you don't like, there's something I put myself in there somehow. So I think the best stories can come from personal experience. I think if you have that within you, then it's going to feel really genuine in your work. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, how important was it for you to have a story that you can personally relate to? I heard you talk about culture-wise. So
Yeah.
how important is that to you?
It's really important to me. I think that I think that in general with literature, you can find yourself in characters who are completely dissimilar than you. I think that's completely possible, and I think that, I've grew up reading all sorts of work from people that were completely different experiences than me. But it's very special to be able to see yourself represented in your work, in creative writing and in fiction and poetry and memoirs, because you feel like you're not the only one. You feel like I'm not isolated. I have a community. I'm close to other people who are like me. So yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question regarding would you have any tips for someone who's looking to possibly get into writing, kind of just freshly diving into that and like finding their itch and like what genre best fits them or how best they can write that on paper? Because I love writing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I overthink and I'm a perfectionist, which I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
So I can be writing something like, no, it doesn't make sense, or that's too much, or that character isn't really involved.
Right.
What tip would you give someone who's looking to get into writing about where do they start, not to have grace with themselves and be okay, I just want to get started and see where it goes.
Yeah. So I wouldn't think about the world around your writing. I wouldn't think about what people are going to say. I wouldn't think about I would turn off the inner critic that says that you can't do this. Because when you're actually in that kind of rough space with just you and the page, you can't really have that because it's going to hinder you. And I know that's happened to me before. If I think too much if I have the inner critic being like, you can't do this, blah, 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 it's be perfect, then it's really difficult to do. I understand that. But you kind of have to turn that off and just put no expectations on yourself. Like, this doesn't have to be good. Like, this doesn't have to be great. This doesn't have to, I don't even have to show this to anybody. This just, I can just sit down, and sometimes you can just write the words. I don't know what I'm writing. I don't know what I'm doing. Just starting like that, and then you start and just keep going with the little train of thought. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Am I a writer? I don't even understand. Blah blah blah, and just keep writing until you get to a point in which there's something there that's kind of really resonating with you, and then you can start from that point. I've done that myself because this is a relatable feeling. I mean, so you're a writer. You have self-doubt. You must be a writer. But yeah, that's what I would do. But I definitely encourage you to keep going.
A follow-up question?
Yeah.
So at any time when you were writing this book, were there ever a point when you were writing a short story where you felt like stuck? You were like, I don't know what else to write. Like, where did you were able to pivot? Like, okay, just breathe, take a minute, step back, and start writing. You feel like your words and your thoughts were writing come smoothly on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. That happened to me a ton of times. Some of the stories I wrote for class So when I was in my MFA and my PhD, so the thing about having a deadline, making a deadline for yourself forces you to do it. So if you're in school, take a class with ISIS. Take a creative writing class.
It's actually mine.
Oh, so they're in your class. Oh, okay. But taking a class can actually help you sometimes because it forces you to have to turn in something. It forces you to complete something. So that can actually be really helpful. But I think sometimes it's okay to walk away from it, but you just have to tell yourself you're going to come back. It's okay to walk away. It's just like, okay. Sometimes like giving yourself, I remember this happened for Liberation Day, which is the last story in the collection. I wrote the first 2 paragraphs, and then I was like, I don't know where to go. So then I just gave up on it for 2 months. But then I said, no, you're going to come back you're going to come back and you're going to keep writing this on this date. And I was like, you just sit down and you're going to do it for this period of time. And then we're talking about religion, but I think it was like a God moment where like all the Wi-Fi went out of my house. and I was grading. I was in the middle of grading. All the Wi-Fi went out of my house. And then the house, everything was completely dark. And I had like no way, I had nothing to do. Like there was nothing I had to do that day. I was like, I have nothing to do. I just write. Like I have to, So then I just sat down and I started writing for a couple of hours. And then I was like, you know what? Every week during this time, the time the Wi-Fi went out, it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because I taught in the morning. I was like, I'm going to write for 3 hours. And then I wrote for 3 hours and I finished that story. So sometimes, and I said it was like, sometimes it's actually setting those deadlines for yourself and actually sitting in the chair and saying, I'm going to do this at this time. I'm just going to write something. And that's how I got through it. I was like, I'm just going to write something. I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm not going to worry about the world around it, whether it's good or not. I'm just going to write something. So that's how I got out of it. Yeah.
One thing I can offer, I haven't written any fiction, but nonfiction is when I'm writing, I'll write in blue font.
Ooh.
And I don't care how much, like exactly what she
good tip.
says, how much garbage it is. And every now and then I'll get to something and I'll like insert quote from Lincoln here, but I just keep going.
Right.
And then I go back later, and then when I feel good about a paragraph, I'll change it to black font. And it's like, okay, I feel good. And my students have told me they find that to be useful, but it's
That's actually a really great tip. I'm going to do that myself.
Yeah.
This is really great.
Yeah,
His
and
advice.
you don't worry about whether it's any good or not. It's just writing it down.
Right, absolutely.
And I think that's the key. So, other questions? These are great questions.
Yeah, these are really great questions.
Yeah. Gabby, you have a question?
I guess I can ask, is there any other Latino or Afro-Latino writers that you admire or you recently read and you really enjoy reading them that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, Isis Fernandez Rojas, right there. He's one of my favorite writers. He's an amazing, amazing writer. So definitely read her stuff. Yeah.
Do your cash later.
No, this is coming from my heart. Yeah, Jasmine Mendez, Ivelisse Rodriguez, Myra Santos Febres. I can make you a list. Actually, I wrote a list that's on electric literature, so if you reference that list. Yeah, yeah, there are a ton. I actually just taught a class that Isis came in for, and she gave a really wonderful talk. That there are just, because sometimes people are just like, oh, are there Afro-Latino writers? I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, there's like a huge amount. There's a lot, and they're all incredible. So there's, even just those names that I gave you, but there's also, and a lot of them are local, too. Some of them are local, like Jasmine Mendez is local, so you can check her out. Isis is right over here, so I would. Ariana Brown, absolutely. Yeah. Who else? Reina Leon, Yesenia Montilla. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, I think I thought about this metaphor. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm not going to be offended, but I thought about this metaphor when I was working out in the morning this week, that I feel like American writing today, and I think it's true in the history teaching as well, it's almost like you're at a baseball game and there's a hum in the crowd because there's all these different voices.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a good thing. It's kind of soothing to be at a baseball game and hear that hum.
Right.
But then on the other hand, because there are so many voices, that's partly why we feel so fractured.
Right.
Because there's not any one dominant narrative
Right.
that exists anymore, really, if that makes any sense. I don't
Well,
know what you think about
I
that.
mean, I kind of like that. I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
yeah,
it just is something I've thought about this. Well, your collection, made me think about it.
Yeah.
A little bit. Well, quite a bit, but something I'd like to tease out a little bit more because there's
Yeah.
really not I don't know. There's just really not a dominant voice. It seems to me, which is maybe that's a
Interesting.
good thing.
Interesting.
Probably is.
it's very interesting.
But
Yeah.
and maybe that's why we're shouting so much because we want to be heard above the crowd.
Right.
Where it seems to be that that's the case.
Right.
What other questions do y'all have? Yolanda, I can tell you've got another one.
I do have another one, and I can get an answer probably from both of you.
Yeah.
But I guess I would get the host first. So my question is, do you believe that mood affects how you write? And also, can you tell a difference in your work when you sleep throughout the day and when you eat versus just working without a break going all the way through?
Wow, these are really good questions. Yeah. Oh my goodness. What do you think? Let me think about this one.
Well, I
Go
think
first.
you kind of want to get, for me, I think you kind of want to get to a place where mood doesn't matter. That for
Right.
me, what worked was I had a particular time of day that when I was working on my book, I had a particular time of day when I could write. And I had time to do it. So I sat down then and I didn't care how I felt. I just had to get the work in. And if you do that every day over the course of a year, you get a lot done.
Yeah.
But so I don't know that I didn't pay attention to it because I felt like I couldn't. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think that I write best when I'm relaxed. I think that if I'm relaxed, and I call it my zone, if I'm in the zone, I don't necessarily have to be, like, it doesn't, I like to go to coffee shops to write a lot. I like to be in my space, in my home, in my office, with all the stuff that I have that surrounds me. I have my big Toni Morrison painting right behind me, and it inspires me. So I think that, I think sometimes you kind of, again, if you're for classes or deadlines, it doesn't really matter. You have to write, and you
Yeah.
have a deadline, so you have to do it. So I think it doesn't matter if you're relaxed or not, you have to do it. But I think for some of my creative writing, I write best when I'm probably more relaxed. And I think probably getting a good night's sleep, taking care of myself does really help. Yeah.
Kind of bounce off what Yolanda said. Would you say that when you're writing and let's say you're in a happy mood, do you think that reflects your writing as if you're writing a story that's about a certain character and it's meant to be dark, but when you're happy, you realize you're writing it, it's like this sense of like joy and light. Does that happen at all when you're writing this collection of short stories?
Oh, these are great. For this collection of short stories, I don't honestly remember my mood when I was writing them. I think I was just like, must write this, deadline. But I think that definitely if I'm in for my first collection, which was a poetry and prose collection, definitely mood dictated that entire book. And you can definitely tell. There are poems that are darker, and I was in a dark, frustrated mood. There are poems that are happy because I was in a happy, good mood. There are pieces that are really kind of midway because that's how I was feeling. So I think maybe for my poetry and my short prose, I feel like maybe mood dictates it. I don't think so much for my short stories, but for my poetry, definitely for poetry. Yeah, that's a good question.
But I think listening to her story about her father desegregating the school and then thinking about the story of Cal, personally, I think there's love.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's not a mood,
Absolutely.
but certainly a deep emotion that's at the heart of that.
Yeah, I love that.
So,
I love
a
that.
background. So, are there any other questions that we have?
You're looking straight at me?
No, I'm kind of in wonderment that you have not asked a question yet. I'm a little bit puzzled.
I mean, like,
Yeah,
she's my friend, I just asked her.
right, I know. Okay, go ahead.
So, is there any specific short story that you say is your favorite, or is one that you would tell readers like you have to read this short story in your book?
Oh, gonna do Toni Morrison again. Is that okay? Red Calf by Toni Morrison. It's the only short story she's ever written, but it is wonderful.
The Red Calf?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think it's a bad note to leave on Toni Morrison at
Yeah,
all.
absolutely.
It
Oh, and I'll
is-
say Sunny's Blues by James Baldwin, but of course these are my favorites. So
Okay.
those are my two favorite short stories.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming
Thank
today.
you so much
and
for coming.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your time.
Thank you.
And for your work. It was a real pleasure. And again, the title of the book is When Trying to Return Home. And you can see I've marked it up. And she has some wonderful aphoristic writing in here that I just love. And I think you will too. I can't recommend it, highly enough. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more content from LSC-Kingwood.